Let me begin with Prime Minister Turnbull. You mentioned the terrible Black Summer fires. You mentioned the 100-year floods happening every 5 years. You mentioned the $38 billion a year in harm that Deloitte has projected in Australia. Those are all terrestrial harms. The United States and Australia are also coastal nations with a significant ocean presence. Would you care to comment at all on the ocean harms and costs that are caused by climate pollution?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as your wife, as a distinguished marine biologist, knows better than both of us, I suspect, the impact of global warming on oceans is shocking. You obviously have the reality of sea level rise, which is doing so much damage to coastal communities, threatens with essentially destruction low-lying island nations in the Pacific. But it's also done a lot of damage to the Great Barrier Reef, and we've had a series of bleaching events which have been driven by warmer temperatures. I have to say this is an issue that the Australian government, and I mean governments, it's not a partisan thing, my side of politics and the current government are both at one on this, have been putting huge resources into it. Most of the money has been spent on trying to stop runoff into the reef, so particularly agricultural runoff, which has nutrients that have very adverse effects on the reef. But the fundamental challenge is the one of temperature, and that can only be dealt with by reducing the world rapidly reducing the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere so that we can stop this continued growth. But the oceans are definitely under threat. They've done a great job. They've been a temperature sink, but that is coming to an end, and I think there's a reckoning.
Leader Frist, thank you for recognizing the economic issue that climate change presents, and indeed, thank you for thanking the committee for recognizing that and proceeding with this work. You've talked about the $122 billion plus disasters, the 5,000 lives lost, the $1 trillion costs, indeed the $134 billion in cost in just 4 risk areas. In the context of all that expenditure, does it make sense that it should be free to pollute with carbon dioxide and methane emissions?
Appreciate your mentioning in the testimony the budgetary implications, because my experience on this particular committee is really leading me to conclude, and the reason I wanted to testify is the broad impact across every budgetary aspect, everything that we consider. We need to put through this frame, and I think we're doing a better job as we go forward. There are various ways that you can put a monetary value on carbon, and we've debated it, for the last 15 years or 20 years ago when I was in this body, whether it's a carbon tax. And from a Republican standpoint, we don't like taxes for the most part, as you know, but the default position is you say, okay, we're not going to talk about it. I will say from a market-based conservative standpoint, putting a price on carbon emissions makes it understandable from a market sense, but from a flexibility sense, instead of over-regulating. Regulations tend to be stifling. You can't change them. Once they're there, it's just almost impossible to get them away. So personally, and the Nature Conservancy would say, putting a price on carbon emissions with responsibility, and yes, you have to make border adjustments coming in. So we can't oversimplify, and border adjustments are very important to do, I believe, coming in if you do it. But it captures the market-based flexibility, the dynamism of the private sector, the coming up with solutions in real time, because nobody has all the answers now. There's not a single bullet here. So I do believe putting a price on carbon emissions with responsibility for that. And then it also allows you, and I'm not here to endorse any particular proposal, it does allow you to use the market to address what we know are now with science are inevitably conditions which are getting worse. And the flip side is it can provide some revenue to give incentives, if properly incented, give some revenues to address these issues or other issues as these revenues come in.